what's going on in Abu Dhabi, the trilateral meeting between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine. Where are we heading, in your opinion? Before going there, let's talk about the reality on the battlefield in Ukraine. The war somehow getting to Kiev, and Zelensky and his administration know what is the reality of the current situation in Ukraine. On the other hand, you see somehow Europeans are getting somehow radical toward the conflict. They don't want to back down. They don't want to see the reality. And how do you see the battlefield in Ukraine?
Well, without going too much into detail, because that could take an entire hour. Walk the battlefield. I've been doing that a couple times the last week, 2 weeks. The reality is, and we see this in different locations, flat out, the Ukrainians are running thin. They're running very thin. As a quick example, judge them by the size of their, quote, counter attacks or their offensives. In 22, we had a big offensive in Kharkiv, which, by the way, destroyed the Ukrainian Iron Fist, the tanks that they were massing in Kharkiv, hiding them in under residential buildings and parking lots. When they went out in combat, they took a lot of heavy losses, but they don't talk about that. They just talk about that they were able to push the Russian army out, which was very thinly spread at that point up in Kharkiv. Then Kherson, which, by the way, the Russian army stepped back out of Kherson city, and the Ukrainians came in 3 days later. They're afraid they were going to get ambushed. They did get artillery ambushed once they came in within range. But these were relatively big offensives. Then we had the vaunted counteroffensive of 23, which is insane if you think about it, because this is like a bad the analogy I used for the 23 offensive was like a bad Van Damme movie. I'm going to take my right leg and I'm going to put it to your left ear. Stand here, wait 1 second. And they literally did what they said they were going to do. They attacked on the spot they said they were going to do. And everything. It's like, nobody does that, actually. You may tell your opponent, I'm going here, but I'm going to go over here, and then over here, and over here, and over here. Yeah, it's called, surprise, element of surprise. No element of surprise. We're going to start more or less on the same date that we said we're going to. And it had the it had the results of 85,000 dead from the Ukrainian side. I don't know how many wounded. They left a lot of their wounded to die. Well, at first they used them as artillery targets, artillery traps. So when the Russian soldiers came out to get them, pick them up, the wounded, they just start firing artillery at them. They just, after a while, they just let them rot, die in place and rot. And nobody's going to get them. And this was and they, for that price, took a field of 120 square kilometers, 12 by 10. Which is a tiny little box. That's World War I casualties. Then that was 23. 24, we had the Kharkiv counteroffensive, or the offensive. And regardless of how much the news blew up about in the West and the maps showing these giant locations, the reality is they were able to penetrate into southeastern Kursk Oblast, and they took southeastern Kursk, which are about 12-13% of the oblast. It's not a small oblast to begin with. It's not huge. But they only took about 13%, one real big town in there, and a bunch of small villages in the middle of the woods. So that was 24. 25, Kupinsk. And what you notice is each time is they're getting much, much, much smaller. They're running out of men and equipment. They're still doing these PR stunts. I think this is the first war in history where one side is fighting not so much for strategical and tactical victories as in PR victories. You got to get the title up there. The Ukrainian army broke through here. Then they all got killed 10 minutes later. Doesn't matter because we just have the picture of them holding a flag. And they've literally done these, by the way. They would send basically suicide squads out. You got to get a picture of you on the border and some this building or this building so I can geolocate you inside. That you're going to get killed afterwards, and survive as you can afterwards, but get the picture. And they started doing that actually on the Russian border back in 23. And these guys would get shot up. The Russian border patrol would see them and open fire on them. And they're going out there putting border stumps on there, taking photos. You're like, geez, it's a waste of men, but it's a PR. It's all about PR. Well, even the PR can't cover up what's going on the battlefield right now. The I've been saying this, Zaporizhzhia is the weakest part right now. The big fight is going on in Konstantinovka. The Russian forces that had taken Krasnoarmeysk and freed Dmitrov or Mirnograd are being refocused onto Konstantinovka. Ukrainians are throwing everything they have in Konstantinovka. The secondary big fight in that area is Krasny Liman, because once Krasny Liman is taken, and it's already partially invested, once Krasny Liman is taken, you're on the high ground overlooking Slaviansk. And if you can start cutting Slaviansk off, you're basically cutting off that whole agglomeration of Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka, which is the last built-up fortified area in the Donbas for the Ukrainians. The Russians are pushing slowly toward Dobropolye, Donetsk Dobropolye. There's a Dobropolye in Zaporizhzhia too. That's a little bit of a confusing thing because a lot of these city names they repeat or they have modifications to them. It's like Dobropolye, it's Dobrskaya Polye or something like that, you know. So if for people aren't paying attention, they'll start getting confused with it because the same names keep popping up or something similar. But the big thing, I think, is the big breakthrough is going in Zaporizhzhia, because this is a front from edge to edge from Gulay Polye. Well, the Russian army is actually about 20 kilometers west of Gulay Polye at this point. Not 20 kilometers, 2 kilometers west of Gulay Polye, maybe 3, and they're pushing their way out. And the Ukrainians are just throwing everything they can into it. If you actually look at the Ukrainian maps, they haven't updated them in 3 months. So Russia hasn't even reached Gulay Polye as far as their maps show. But the reality is, it's west of Gulay Polye, and about 25, 26 kilometers from Oryokhovo. But Oryokhovo has been invested from the south by 2 columns, and there's a column moving from the west to hit Oryokhovo. That's about 7 kilometers, 8 kilometers out. So it's being pushed through in different areas. And this is your last fortified major town. Well, and again, it's one of these towns. If anybody has been in America or modern big Russian cities, you have urban sprawl because you got a lot of land. And this is kind of the same, except that urban sprawl is mostly up and down 2 major highways. So you got Oryokhovo in the middle, and you got urban sprawl of these little neighboring towns that kind of bleed into each other. And that's where this kind of fortification line becomes in that area. But that's it. After that, it's pretty much open fields. They're trying to dig field fortifications in the open. They don't have manpower for them. And basically that area is where I think everything's going to collapse fast. The Russian troops have already taken the crossing across estuary 11 kilometers south of Zaporizhzhia itself. And Zaporizhzhia sits in the northwestern corner of the Zaporizhzhia province. So they've got, from that point, on a straight line, they've got 11 kilometers to Zaporizhzhia city itself. So for the Americans, it's 6.6 miles. Not exactly a very far, very big distance. So the Ukrainians, the only thing that's saving the Ukrainians is the weather, and because it's not cold enough. The temperatures there are ranging from low plus to about -10, and sometimes, you know, and the problem is, as we were talking, Nima, even at -13, you know, I've got a dark colored car, and the snow under the sun at -13 was melting. In fact, I was driving by a big pile of there's road construction, big pile of dirt and clay that had been dug up that hasn't been removed yet, and it was steaming. It's -13 outside, bright sunlight, and it's steaming because there's some wood chips and everything else in there that's decaying, and B, it's the sun heating the ground, right? And it's -13 outside. You wouldn't think it's got to be solid, but it's already steaming, which means it's already defrosting. And that becomes a big problem when you have tanks and heavy equipment going over in these open fields, is they're waterlogged, and the water's starting to turn, the ice is turning into water under sunlight, even though it's freezing temperatures outside. Yeah, sure, at night it'll refreeze, but that kind of becomes a difficult point for with heavy equipment. And then once the unfreeze hits and everything floods out, until all that drains out. You'll have about a month, which is a month of very limited movement, because you can't go through that black earth. It's like going through. Oh, good Lord! If you've never been through black earth, it will suck. It just won't suck the boots off. It'll suck the socks off. It might suck the skin off your bones. I mean, it is just like it's not even like clay. It's like quicksand. Worse, probably even that. It's such a consistency. So it's very difficult to move through that. And vehicles just churn everything up to where you're literally swimming in it. And then, historically speaking, once heavy equipment came into play, it's one thing on horses. It's even much harder if your horses are pulling wagons. But when you get into heavy vehicles going over something like this, it just, they just sink. I mean, it's flat out. They'll just bottom out, and then you wait till everything dries and start digging them out. So that's buying the Ukrainians some amount of time, because the Russian forces can't move as fast and as hard in that area. But it's still the weakest sector, because they simply don't have the manpower. They don't have prepared positions. The prepared positions they had are all overrun in the south and in the east. And unlike the Donbas, where they were pouring cement for 8 years and preparing these positions, there's a lot fewer towns in Zaporizhzhia, so you don't have this endless agglomeration of suburbia and towns and villages bleeding into each other. And they didn't have 8 years to do anything. They had about a year and a half to do field fortifications. And they did a very poor job of those overall. So they had, while Gulai-Polya held, they more or less held that line. But the moment Gulai-Polya went, that was it. The eastern flank is gone. The western flank's already been flanked. So now you've got whatever forces in the middle that are steadily being squeezed together around Oriokhov. And once that territory is taken and in-depth lines of communication secured, you've got 11 kilometers to Zaporizhzhia. So I think that's the big. If Zaporizhzhia falls, not if, but when, that opens up all of central Ukraine in many different directions. And that becomes a nightmare scenario for the Ukrainians, because they can't defend in every direction that they could get attacked in. So,
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we know that on the part of the NATO, there are people in the United States talking about providing Ukraine with, like Lindsey Graham, with Tomahawk missiles. Do you see anything at this particular moment, at this stage of war in Ukraine, that the West can provide anything to Ukraine to somehow, to change the game, or somehow bring some sort of leverage to Ukraine, to the position of Ukraine? What else? What can they do? Is that possible for the current situation in Ukraine, considering their army, considering the manpower they have, considering the support they're receiving from the West, from NATO? What else NATO can do for them that they haven't done before?
Well, the U.S. military can take its entire effective ground force, plus the Marine Corps, which would be about 450,000 troops, and toss them on the battlefield, and then swallow the mass casualties that will happen afterwards. Well, they could do that. All of NATO in Europe can pretty much just suck up all of its combat-capable soldiers, and it'll probably come up to a little less than what the U.S. can do by itself, and throw all that on the battlefield and suck up the mass casualties. I mean, there are a lot of dead Europeans, and there are a lot of dead Americans. They don't want to talk about it. And Lindsey Graham definitely doesn't want to talk about it. That little Epstein wannabe ghoul. He, went, oh, there are no Americans now. Oh, yeah, there are, and not a few. By the way, those HIMARS going boom, those are Americans behind the wheel. The Patriots going boom, a Patriot battery is 94 people if it's a full strength. That's a Patriot battery. That's mechanics, operators, commanders, and everybody. 94 people. And those aren't Ukrainians. They didn't get that many Patriot crew up to speed. Base course to prepare a Patriot mechanic's like 54 weeks. Officers are half a year. Operators are a bit less. But that's a long time. Most of those Patriot batteries, when the Germans go, oh, we gave them 2 Patriot batteries. Well, guess who's sitting behind those Patriot batteries? Those are Germans. And when those Patriot systems get whacked, those are Germans burning in those vehicles, or Americans burning those vehicles, or the Brits, or the Poles. They're not Ukrainians. So there's plenty of people from Europe that have gone to meet Saint Bandera. The Poles have taken somewhere around 10,000 casualties, and that's because they were rotating battalion to get them combat experience. But you get combat experience by being in combat. When you get in combat, you start taking casualties. That's kind of the way the game plays. Novorisk seems to have backed off from that somewhat, which is good. But then again, some of the things coming out of his mouth makes you wonder. When the guy says he talks to Pilsudski every day, the guy that's been dead for the last 90 years, it's starting to make you wonder a few things, and other statements that he's made. But why Poland can't get a normal leader in 30 years? There are normal people like Brown, but they keep electing people that are whacked in one way or the other. I don't know why. But there's outside of that, the problem with a Tomahawk. First of all, a Tomahawk would be strictly Americans firing it. I mean, let's be honest. I'll tell you another one. The HIMARS are strictly Americans firing. It's not Ukrainians firing HIMARS. From end to end, that is Americans. And I've been saying this for 3 years now, that those are Americans. Those are Americans in the vehicles. Those are Americans picking out targets. Those are Americans that are in the vehicles launching those missiles. They're American systems guiding those missiles. So when those missiles also hit civilian targets and kill women and children, those are American military killing Russian civilians. I don't know how else to put it. And thank you, New York Times. In December of 24, the New York Times confirmed all of it, including the fact that the ATACMS missiles were not a request from the Ukrainians. That was a demand from U.S. generals that are running the war. New York Times, the mouthpiece of the CIA, they just spilled the beans on everything. Thank you for confirming what I was saying for 2 years before that. It's nice to be, to be confirmed, because even on Russian television, people were looking at me like I was a little, off there. I'm like, no, those are Americans. Don't say those are Ukrainians fired. They weren't Ukrainians fired. They were maybe under Ukrainian organization, but they don't answer to Ukrainians. Those are controlled by Americans. So yeah, that's like it or not, but that's how that cookie crumbles. So outside of putting a lot of Europeans and Americans in the crosshairs to be killed in this war, there's pretty much nothing they can actually do. Now, the problem with Tomahawks is not only would those be Americans, but a Tomahawk is a nuclear-capable missile. So if there's Tomahawks flying toward Moscow, the only way you tell it's a nuclear-capable missile is whether when it blows up, and you figure out what the warhead is, or if you shoot it down and you go look at the warhead. Either way, you've got to consider the fact, especially from the U.S. that has a first strike policy and has attempted to behead Iran, has with the Israelis tried to behead Hezbollah, Hamas, has pulled these same types of stunts on Yugoslavia when they tried to kill Milosevic. People don't remember that, but they did. They blew up his house, killed part of his family. They've done this numerous times, and all under the guise, including in Yugoslavia and other places, all under the guise of negotiations. The U.S. is not exactly a trustable partner there, if you can call them a partner. So if there's a missile heading toward Moscow and it's a Tomahawk missile, you have to consider that this is a nuclear-tipped missile trying to do a decapitation strike. And what's the logical response? Full salvo nuclear strike back on the U.S. and Europe, wipe out. And then we've got nuclear Armageddon. So do you want to give that kind of power to Satanists sitting in Kiev? And again, you got Satanists sitting in Washington. So I don't know how big the difference is. Yeah, Epstein's files opens up a lot of things on a lot of people these days. So, so I don't know. I don't think there is anything they can do short of declaring war and just throwing everything they have in the kitchen sink.